Hello, beautiful people of the internet. How are you doing today? My name is Jackie and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today in this video, I am going to be talking about all of the books that I read in the month of May. In the month of May, I read 5 books and DNF'd 1 for a total of 1,731 pages and an average star rating of 3.4 out of 5. The first book I read in May, I honestly have begun to forget my specific thoughts about it because it's been over a month now since I read it, and I read 75% of the book in one day, so it's kind of blurring together in my mind a little bit. But that was 8 Perfect Murders by Peter Swanson, which I ended up giving 4 stars. 8 Perfect Murders follows a man named Malcolm Kershaw who owns a mystery bookstore in Boston. Years ago on his blog, Malcolm wrote a post about 8 perfect murders in fiction. 8 murders in various works of literature that he thought were particularly brilliant for whatever reason. But now an FBI agent comes to see him at his bookshop and says that there is a killer who is recreating the murders from Malcolm's list. I know this book has received mixed reviews. Out of the 3 Peter Swanson books that I have read, I would rank this one in the middle. I enjoyed it less than The Kind Worth Killing, which is one of my favorite mystery books, but I liked it more than Her Every Fear. Overall, I really did enjoy this book a lot. Like I said, I read 75% of it in one evening. I was so into the book. I think the reason why maybe some people didn't like this book as much is it is definitely more mystery than thriller. It is not one that is going to be super fast-paced. It's a bit more of a slow burn. Because of that, I have seen some people say they thought the book was boring, though in my experience, I did not feel that way. I thought the plot was extremely engrossing. I would describe this book as a love letter to mysteries. A murderous love letter, but a love letter all the same. 8 Perfect Murders does spoil the 8 books on Malcolm's list, so I would definitely do some research into that before you pick this book up. It also spoils a couple other books like The Murder of Roger Ackroyd by Agatha Christie, but if you go on Goodreads and look through the reviews, there will be reviews that discuss the different books that are spoiled in this one, so if any of those are on your TBR, you can know ahead of time and read them before you pick up this book. I don't remember exactly why I gave this book 4 stars instead of 5. I really did thoroughly enjoy it. I don't think it's going to be a new all-time favorite, and while the reveal about who the murderer was not my #1 suspect, I believe, this is, like many mystery books, not going to be the most surprising just because there's such a finite cast of characters that there's only so many possibilities about who it could actually be. Overall, though, I thought this book was a lot of fun, and I would definitely recommend it. Next, I finished reading The Camelot Betrayal by Kirsten White, which is the second book in the Camelot Rising trilogy, and I ended up giving this book 3 stars. This is the second book in the series, and this series follows Guinevere as she comes to Camelot to marry King Arthur. And in Camelot, magic has been outlawed since Merlin's exile years earlier. However, there might be dark forces stirring that threaten Camelot's safety, and it is up to Guinevere to keep her husband safe. I enjoyed the first book. I thought it had a really good ending, and overall, this second book in the series was okay. In my personal opinion, this book is really just doing a lot of setup for the final book in the series, and it doesn't have a lot of plot itself. There were some sections of the book where I was a little bored, though I am excited to read the next, and I believe final book in the series to see how things are going to end up. I am really conflicted about who I want the character of Guinevere to end up with in this series, because there are several different love interests that are being set up, and I do have one that I think I prefer over the others, because that's just the person who I think Guinevere has the most romantic and sexual tension with. But let's just say that person is maybe morally gray and not the person I feel like I should be rooting to end up with Guinevere. But the shipping heart wants what the shipping heart wants, and that's the ship that I want. So I'll be interested to see how the series ends up. This book was not my favorite, but I do like the series and I enjoy a lot of the characters and their dynamics, so I'll be interested to see if this series can stick the landing. Next, let's talk about my DNF. That was Notorious Royal Marriages, A Juicy Journey Through 9 Centuries of Dynasty, Destiny, and Desire by Leslie Carroll. Oh man, I was really interested in reading this book because I love royal history. The lives of various European monarchs and the crazy things that happen to them are so interesting to me. History really can be stranger than fiction sometimes, and I just love the drama, the intrigue, the court politics. However, this book was such a disappointment. As you can probably tell from the subtitle, in this book, Leslie Carroll is trying to have a very accessible tone. This is, I think, a good book for people who know relatively nothing about history and just want some good gossip. This is not a serious work of historical scholarship by any means, and while there's nothing wrong with that exactly, Leslie Carroll's attempts at humor annoyed me so quickly because a lot of the things that she said I didn't think were funny, and some of the things that she said I actually found borderline offensive. As I said in my Goodreads review for this, it's not like I am deeply invested in the feelings of a dead English king who's been dead for multiple centuries. Obviously, like, that doesn't matter, but it's just so cringe. Some of the things that she says in here, thinking she's being funny, she makes fun of different historical figures for their weight, which came across to me as just really inappropriate. She makes very mean-spirited comments, such as referring to historical figures with early onset dementia as crackpots. And honestly, just from a quick Google search, I couldn't even find any reputable source saying both of those people had early onset dementia as she presents them to have had. And even little things like she calls Jane Seymour, one of Henry VIII's wives, a doormat and a pill, which just felt so harsh and not as funny as I think she thought it was. Even stupid things like saying, oh, Eleanor of Aquitaine redecorated the palace like a medieval Martha Stewart. Is that supposed to be a joke? Just really falls flat for me. I also think some of the facts as they were presented in this book are maybe not entirely accurate. A lot of times when I read medieval histories, I feel like the authors frequently present their interpretation of the facts as if they are fact when they are really just conjecture. The fact is, it is impossible for us to know what these historical figures were thinking, and honestly, I don't think this book taught me anything that I couldn't learn from a Wikipedia page. I think maybe if you're somebody who is not super into history but enjoys scandal and gossip and hearsay, maybe you would like this book, but for me, it was too painful for me to finish it, and I'm really upset because I thought I would really like this, and I did not. Next, I read Death Comes to Pemberley by P.D. James. This is an unofficial sequel to Pride and Prejudice, where the now married Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy are hosting a ball at their home, but their idyllic life is suddenly thrown into chaos when Elizabeth's sister Lydia shows up at the house uninvited, screaming that her husband, Mr. Wickham, has just been murdered. I went into this book with very low expectations because I've heard mixed negative things about it, and it doesn't have a very high Goodreads rating. However, I think going in with those low expectations was the right way for me to go because I think I enjoyed it more since I wasn't expecting that much. I ended up giving Death Comes to Pemberley 3 stars. Overall, I thought this book was fine. It had a really interesting concept. I do think at times P.D. James did a good job at trying to capture a little bit of Jane Austen's voice, and with a few exceptions, I do not think any of the characters were grossly out of character. I could buy most of them doing the things that they did in this book. There was one character in particular who I think really was a bit massacred by the text, but overall I think P.D. James did an okay job. I think my one major complaint about this book is I wish we had had more Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy interactions. I wanted to see more of the Darcys being married, being parents, and I feel like we didn't get a lot of time with them together on the page. Mr. Darcy spends a lot of the book being involved in this ongoing murder investigation, going to the inquests, and Elizabeth kind of just stays home at Pemberley, and I feel like if there was a murder investigation going on, no way Elizabeth Darcy is not going with her husband. This is the girl who walked to Netherfield with her petticoat 6 inches deep in mud. No way she is not hiking up her skirt and saying, "Fitzwilliam, I'm coming with you, bring the carriage around, I'm not taking no for an answer." If there was a murder mystery going on, you know Elizabeth Bennet is getting herself involved. She's not just gonna sit home and wait for Darcy to give her the recap. There was a mini-series made of Death Comes to Pemberley that I believe aired on Masterpiece PBS, and I would definitely be interested in checking that out. I've heard from some people that it's actually better than the book, so I would like to watch that and see what I think. Next, I read The Lost Orphan by Stacey Halls, which I ended up giving 4 stars. 6 years ago, our main character, Bess Bright, gave birth to an illegitimate daughter, and though she wanted to keep her daughter, she was forced to place her daughter in a foundling hospital. 6 years later, Bess now has the savings she needs to support herself and her daughter, so she goes back to the hospital, hoping she can finally have a life with her child. However, when she gets there, she is told that someone claiming to be the mother already picked her daughter up years ago. So where exactly is Bess's daughter now, and how is she going to get her back? I have heard this book be described as a historical mystery, and honestly, I don't think it is much of a mystery. I would classify it as straightforward historical fiction set in Georgian-era London, because the question of where Bess's daughter ended up is really not hard to figure out, and it's not exactly kept secret from the reader for very long. Bess figures out very quickly where her daughter is. I did enjoy the writing style of this book, and I think it was a super interesting concept. It's also a very female-driven story. I would consider reading more books by this author because I do think she is a very capable writer, though this is definitely not the mystery that some people described it as. I did have a few minor issues with this book, which is why it was not a full 5 stars, and I don't see it as one of my new all-time favorites. This book is told from dual perspectives. We have the perspective of Bess and Alexandra, who is a wealthy widow, and I did enjoy the two perspectives. That is a technique that I really do like in books. However, the way this book is formatted is we'll have an entire part that is just Bess's perspective, then an entire part that is Alexandra's. Then we go back to Bess, then back to Alexandra, etc., etc. And I kind of wish the author had done alternating chapters instead, because I think that would have been a better reading experience than having a whole section of Bess, then not hearing from Bess for 100 pages, and then going back, and that sort of back and forth I did not really like. I also felt like the ending was a bit rushed, and there is a romantic storyline for Bess in this book that I found really unnecessary and underdeveloped. I wasn't really into that romantic plotline, and I feel like my subscribers probably think that I hate romance because I always complain about romantic storylines in books. That's not true. I love romantic plot lines, but with standalone novels in particular, a lot of times I feel like the author is trying to shoehorn a romance in where it's not really needed, and if the romance is rushed, I can't root for it because I want to genuinely buy into these characters and their connection. I want to believe they love each other. And when you have two characters meet and then get together really quickly without properly exploring their feelings and why they're attracted to each other, I just can't really care. In this book in particular, I feel like the romantic storyline wasn't needed, and it didn't add anything to the overall story. And finally, the last book that I read in May was The Mystery of Mrs Christie by Marie Benedict. I ended up giving this book 3 stars. I had very mixed feelings about this book overall. This book centers on the disappearance of famous mystery novelist Agatha Christie in December 1926. For almost a century, we don't know exactly what happened when Agatha Christie disappeared, and so that's something that this book explores. In the past, we have chapters narrated by Agatha chronicling her meeting and falling in love with her future husband, Archie, and then while Agatha is missing, we have chapters from Archie's perspective. This is, again, a book that I would classify as fully historical fiction and not a mystery. The ultimate reveal of where Agatha was is, in my opinion, completely anticlimactic. If you look at the blurbs on the back of the book, one describes this book as having twists, surprises, and an ending that packs a punch. Yeah, I don't think this book has any twists. This one says a winning whodunit. This is not a whodunit. This one says that it's part domestic thriller, part golden age mystery. I don't think it is a thriller or a mystery. Now, don't get me wrong, I still thought that there were parts of this book that were really interesting, but I don't think it should be called a mystery because it is not a mystery. The ultimate resolution is very obvious, and you know, I think part of that is not Marie Benedict's fault. Obviously, Agatha Christie was a famous historical figure, so it's not like the reader is going to be in suspense wondering if she died, if somebody kidnapped her, because the reader already goes into the book knowing a little bit about what happened. To me, what was interesting about this book was the depiction of the Christies' marriage. They are depicted in this book as having had a seemingly wonderful romance to begin with, and then their marriage gradually falls apart, largely due to Archie's selfishness and his inability to sympathize with his wife. One of the parts of this book that to me was the most interesting was the relationship between the Christies and their daughter, because initially Archie did not want to have children at all because he thought if they had a child, then Agatha would love the child more than him, and her constant need to tiptoe around her husband's feelings really negatively impacts Agatha's life. And I think that the relationship that the daughter has with both of her parents is really fascinating, and you can just see this resentment in Agatha slowly grow and fester. It's a really interesting examination of a toxic marriage and a completely narcissistic husband who can't sympathize with his wife in the slightest. I think the writing of this book was strong and that the way the characters were drawn was really interesting. However, I think that this book is advertised a little wrong because ultimately there are no twists, and I don't think there was anything that happened in this book that was particularly surprising. I almost forgot, but one important caveat I want to give you is this book spoils The Murder of Roger Ackroyd by Agatha Christie, which was also spoiled in 8 Perfect Murders, oddly enough. So if you want to read this book and you haven't gotten to Roger Ackroyd yet and you intend to read it, definitely read that first because it is spoiled in this book. Luckily for me, I had read it already, so that was not an issue for me. But God, I would have been so mad had I not read that yet and this book spoiled it. If you're a casual Christie fan who hasn't read that yet, definitely do that. I don't think it outright spoils any of her other books. Some of them are mentioned vaguely, but no plot details given. So these are the books that I read in the month of May 2021. I almost said 2020 there. I do not know what year it is. Let me know, did you read any of these books? What books did you read this month? What were your favorites, your least favorites? Oh my God, they are falling. Oh no. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please give it a big thumbs up if you enjoyed and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more from me. I post new videos every single Wednesday. My social media links are down below if you want to follow me on Tumblr, Instagram, or be my friend on Goodreads. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day. Bye, and I'll see you in the next video.